Shalom, all praises to the Most High, the King, who is soon to return for his people. All praises to him. Just wanted to keep my word, come back today, do the part 2. Yesterday, for many, maybe, introduced you to Kayal and to Ebedel. And I don't know what's going to entail the rest of this chapter because I haven't read it. I want to come and read it with you, to be excited with you for the truth that's in it. Also, the Most High say the same. Maybe tomorrow or the next day, I'll keep my word and I'll share chapter 7 in the book of Remembrance of Melchizedek with you as well. So, that's where we at today. So I'm not going to do a lot of commentary from the beginning. I'll just go ahead and begin reading where I left off from yesterday, and let's see what it brings us. So this is the foundations of Shabbat, Melchizedek, chapter 9, verse 93. And when we gathered again before the Urim, I am once again viewing the creek in the settlement where Melchizedek was instructed by his grandfather, p.2, which is the name of rock, a rack used by the Erkadashah. So the Erkadashah calls rack p.2. And it seems no one here in the village, and the spirit of the Erkadashah is growing stronger, and they're softly calling my name. I answer, here I am. And they all want to tell me a story about the triumph of agency, which is one of the most tender stories ever told by me. And Ebedel is going to speak for them. Ebedel is another of the holy watchers. For she likes to be the one who spreads good news. And she is my special kindred. And she says, here at this stream, Melchizedek was born again, when his grandfather taught him to top the top half of the information on the tablet. He was born again in relation to what Anoki said meant to him, by comprehending the living water. And it applies to salvation and righteousness. And it changed his life. And from the day of his coming of age, he became intent to be taught from on high the things of heaven. And even though there was not yet a covenant tablet, the information that would someday be appointed was becoming known to him. And Melchizedek continued to ask questions and to earnestly seek greater understanding. And it came to pass that in his 18th year, Melchizedek was again taught by his grandfather, p.2. And the information that would bring understanding is that which would come to be shown on the bottom half of the tablet. And by these means, Melchizedek came to understand what he meant to Anoki said. And his rebirth was now complete. And he began to know more about his vision at this early age. And the law knew that he could not fulfill. And the law knew that he could. Well, he did. He could not fulfill his vision alone. But he must have his rightful companion. Verse 97. And it came to pass that about the time of Imzara was grown, rock had the habit of being gone for days at a time. And he would report that he was planting apricot trees and grapevines in an isolated and hidden valley where no one lived. And everyone wondered why he would do that. And all he would say is, the Spirit is guiding me. And every so often, he would go there to tend his plants. Yet, no one lived there. And it was about a day's journey away. Melchizedek chapter 9, verse 98. And it came to pass that p.2 continued to visit the harvesters of town. And he ministered to the slaves and the women and children there. And his righteous teachings, opening up to them a knowledge of the love of Anoki said. And that is to say, he taught with enlightenment and understanding, which is the reproval of the Erikadasha. And even though he knew they had strong men on the lookout for him, he continued to visit them. And he chose to risk himself because of his love of the people and the leadings of the Spirit. And one day he came upon them, and he could see that they had a new young overseer attending them. And he could tell he was their overseer by his behavior and manner of dress. But he, being led by the Spirit, went boldly up to him and said, "Can I help with the harvest? I'm just passing by." And the overseer said, "Yes, you can. We will feed you for your help." And p.2 said, "I've brought food for you." And the overseer was amazed. And he thought, "What kind of man is this?" And p.2 said to the overseer, "What is your name?" And he said, "I am Rabab, and I am a son of Marbab." And I felt the name means one who can hide chaos. And he called Rabab because his father intended for him to multiply his wealth and expand his dominance over men. And p.2 said, "I am called Rak, and I will gladly help you with the harvest." And it came to pass that as his time went by, and p.2 had visited them a few times, he saw that Rabab's countenance was changed, and he was troubled. And he called upon Rak, and he said, "I will confide in you to see if you can help me." And Rak said, "Say on." And he said, "There's a slave girl here named Myra, whose face is bright with the light of Anoki said. And you have taught us, and I desire to marry her. That is her over there. Oh, isn't she delightful? But if I marry her, my father will kill me, and I would escape with her. But if I did, the men of my father would find me and do away with us both, and we have no place to flee to." And p.2 said, "I can indeed help you, for I know of a very fine place that has been prepared for you. And it is in a well-protected and hidden valley, about 4 days' journey from here. So when you are ready, I will take you there, and you will find a place of safety. And I know how to take you there so that you cannot be followed." And it came to pass, when their work was done for the day, the troop was starting to load up the harvest to return home. Some few lingered behind, and it was Rabab and Myra and some few of their friends, and they too carried burdens to the harvest. And when the others were out of sight, they turned to follow p.2, and it was just before dark. And p.2 took them towards their haven, all that night without stopping. And they traveled in such a way that they could not be discovered. in 3 days. And weary travelers arrived in the valley that p.2 had prepared, according to the leadings of the law. And it was at that time, and it was at the time of the harvest of the apricots and grapes. And they called the encampment Malat. Note at the bottom, see Strong's 44:22. Because it was a settlement of those who had escaped into the arms of Anokised. And they were rescued by his hand of love. And when the people of the settlement of Lamech and Baltan heard the news, gifts and provisions were sent to them. And the people of Malat prospered and were well prepared for winter. But as it would be expected, with those who have undergone slavery, there was an underlying feeling of bitterness in those who had not been born again. So he said, those of us who have been gone through slavery, and if you have not been born again, it's an underlying feeling of bitterness for being enslaved. And in the 22nd year of Melchizedek, p.2 asked him if he wanted to go with him to visit the encampment of Malat. And he had done so before. And he went to be with the people, for it was the celebration of the new year for the righteous. And while he was there, he met a young maiden. And while everyone was engaged in preparing the meal, they stood talking by a dwelling. And he said, "How are you called?" And she said, "How are you called?" And he said, "I am called Shem." See Strong's 80:35. And she began to laugh. And he was confused at her behavior. And he said, "Why do you laugh?" And she said, "You are called the name. And I am called Shem." See Strong's 80:36, which is the same name. They call me Shem to hide my name, Zedekiah, pronounced Zedek Kayal Bob, because that's how you break it down at the bottom of the page. That Anokised gave me. What name are they hiding for you? And he said, Melchizedek. And the two of them looked intensely into the other's eyes for a moment. And being overcome with emotion, they turned and busied themselves with the activities of the day. And when Melchizedek returned home, he told his mother, Imzara, what had happened. And she was amazed. And she knew it was because of the teachings of her father that the people of Malat would know how to name a maiden in this way. And she said, "We must invite the family to visit us here to find out the meaning of this." And by, after the planting was over, Rabab and Mara and their daughter Shem, together with little brothers, came to visit. And while they were visiting, a runner arrived, out of breath, for his must haste. And he went immediately to Lamech, and he said, "Malat has been raided and set up by men of Tawa, and our provisions are gone." And all the people are either in hiding or have been scattered or destroyed. And immediately Lamech consulted with Rock. And it was determined that Rock would take a company of men and go to Malat to see what could be done. Now in Malat, they lived a young maiden named Ahaba. See Strong's 160. And she was closed, and she was a close friend to Shum. And Shum was urgent. And she accompanied the troop who returned to Malat to help. And the souls of Abba and Shum were joined together, and they could not be separated. And their love for one another was beyond measure. And when the company of helpers arrived, they saw all the dwellings had been set in disarray, with many of them destroyed and burned. And with their arrival, some came out of hiding, and the conditions there were heartbreaking. And the people in Erekadasha mourned with Masa the lamb. And I do not know how many were lost, but I saw what seemed like most of them survived. And Shum looked about to find Ahaba. And she called out, Ahaba, Ahaba. And soon a man came over and said, Ahaba has been killed. And Shum asked, where have you laid her? And he pointed to a dwelling, and she went in. And the people knew of great love they had for one another. And they knew what grief Shum would have at the loss of Ahaba. And when they saw her going, some began to weep again, knowing what it would mean for Shum to behold her dear friend being dead. And pretty soon Shum brought Ahaba out, helping her along, for she was unsteady on her feet. Shum raises Ahaba from the dead. It's an image. Had a thought come to my head. It says, with man is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And we've heard that God is love. That great love. And their tears were turned to joy. And I saw much of the garments of Ahaba were torn, and a large injury that had been healed over could be seen on her back. And now I know that Shum had raised Ahaba from the dead, and it was the law who healed her injury. And the people had never seen such a thing, but no one spoke of it or rushed over to inquire of what had been done or how it had happened. And I think that they felt to do so, may have reversed what happened, or that it all may have been seen to be so holy. It was best to rejoice in their hearts and say nothing. And it came to pass that with the passage of time, no one ever heard an account of it, but the ones who beheld it knew. And those from the settlement of Lamak did what they could to help them through the night. The next day, all the people traveled away from Malat, and they all returned to the village of Lamak together. And it came to pass that as I looked with Urim, I saw an assembly of people, which was the village name for the encampment of Lamak, because the village was named after the two white stones of Iona and Batin. And in the midst of this assembly, I saw Imzara and Mara sitting on the ground facing one another, being close up so they could confer together. And all the people were encircled around them, and mantles were brought and placed on their shoulders. And I know that this was a sign of respect and a signal that all who held it would abide, but what these two women would decide. And one was the mother of Melchizedek, and the other was the mother of Zedekiah. And after conferring together, these two women asked Rabab to tell the people what his plans were in relocating the people of Malat. And he said, I have heard of a land that is pure in its whiteness. And it is the very heart of Anokiseg. See Strong's 38:44 and 38:25. And it is in the south, and it's called Lebanon. And the Spirit is leading me that I should guide my people there to find peace from violence. And at last leave the evil of Seko behind. Our hearts are too tender to stay with you here, because those of Tower might find you also. And I know the law has a special purpose for you to remain here. And I know he will bless you here, but we are being led onward to the south. And Imzara and Mara and all the people respected the words of Rabab. And everyone spoke quietly together, sharing their personal guidance from the law. And all the people looked to the two women, and they said, we would like Shum to remain here in Ebenem, because of her vision. And Myra expressed her willingness to leave her daughter behind for the sake of the desires of Matzah. And she wept and embraced Shum. And the two of them knew that when the people departed to the south, they may never see one another again. And Habah stepped forward, and she said, if Shum will be staying, then I must remain also. And it was because of that the two girls would remain behind in their service to Anokiseg. And another mother and daughter embraced in their utterly selfish love for Anokiseg. And they also wept together. And then it all turned into excitement as the people prepared for their long journey. And provisions were laid by for them. And Arvade and Put were there. And they were to guide them to Lebanon. And Kabodiel continued, and she said, and all these decisions done with agency had shown how righteousness and salvation can triumph. And so you see, Ben Elam, that spiritual power and greatness arises out of the perfect spirit led us of agency. And it does not depend upon the perceptions of men and how they view one another. And I will rehearse to you this chain of events in the use of agency that brought triumph. And it all started with the birth of Rock, when it was decided to allow his birth to be a part of a calling forth ceremony, which was meant to call forth protection by Hashema for the vision of the people. It was a third spirit of life in all creation. And you will see that because of his ceremony, that not only were the visions of his lineage protected, but the protection of all visions would be protected. And the end result of his chain of events in the use of agency brought triumph. And this protection is of an eternal nature. And Rock pursued his vision, he being of Zachari, being a Nazarite, to be separated out to be taught by the Erkadasha. And the mothers did not want their daughters to marry him because he was different. And Rock clinged to his vision in spite of it. And he chose to follow his vision, even if it meant he would never be married. See, same as Christ. Christ was never married. And by youth had pressure not to marry him. But she too chose to follow her vision and be a woman among the Zachari. And she also was taught from on high. And Rock chose to minister to the people of Tawa at the risk of his own life. And he chose to prepare a place for the people there. I just had a thought in my mind how I often make these videos. And if I look up, I can see where they show you where they have like two bodies, maybe a man and a woman, or they're showing people that are viewing. Certain things I say, people that are viewing, it'll pop up 1 or 2 or maybe 3. And then other statements that I make, not that I make, but I read, that people don't agree, all the images disappear like nobody is watching, or they all turned off. Well, I would just say consider the words on the pages of the books. For many of this information you've never heard before. Because remember, in your churches, you've been taught dogma. You have not been taught pure religion. Meaning you have not been taught the pure, unadulterated word of God, of Anoki said. So you're holding on to false dogma in a religious mind state as to say that you stand in the, well, what does Psalm 1 say? Blessed is he who stand, let's read it. What's the Psalms? Don't stand in this place though. Psalms 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful. You might not think you a scorner, but if you don't know the word other than what your lying preacher told you. Now, I'm not calling all the preachers liars, but if the shoe fits, they say. Now you sit in the seat of the scorner. You're judging God. But his delight is in the law of the light of the Most High, the law of the Most High. And in his law does he meditate day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, because they already judged, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the law knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Don't be a scorner. Melchizedek 9, 1 and 26. And Rock chose to minister to the people of Tawa at the risk of his own life. And he chose to prepare a place for the people there who were born again. And he chose to provide a place of retreat for people he knew not of at the time. And it allowed them to put their conversations into a way of life that became a holy, righteous community. And the decisions of Mzara to have Myra's family visit at just the right time to save their lives was no accident. And the decision to allow the two girls to stay behind led to a marvelous thing. It was the daughter of a slave girl and the son of a master Seiko, who became the wife of the one who Matzah named Michael the Prince, who is the one of the archangels of heaven. And Michael is the one who announced the conception of Matzah to all the Erkadashai, and thus agency by the righteous prevailed. And out of the deepest poverty and slavery, and out of the vilest evil of Seiko, came visions that joined with and became equal to the visions that arose out of the supreme righteousness that came down the line of Abara and Shamar, only to be seen by all the heaven and mankind, to be equal in their visions. And they all stood as the foremost people of the earth in their day, and also in ours. And all this use of agency brought triumph to the world. And you will see that it made possible the establishment of Shabbat. And it came to pass that I began to turn my attention in the Urim once again towards Malat. And here in Malat, everything is chaotic. And people are crying and praying. They are going out to search the hills to be sure they are found everywhere. And some knew the likely places where people would hide, and wounds were being discussed with tenderness and love and care. And a runner is best sent back by Ebedel to tell them all the people who remained would be coming. And I did not know if they had dead to bury. I did not want to look to see. And when all was ready the next morning, I saw Ahabal's father was a big and strong man, and he was once called Kenam, Strong's 2600 from 2580, kindness or graciousness. And he was tender-hearted and gentle. And he made a wide sash around his chest and back to carry her in, and she sat there with him, carrying her all the way back the distance of a day's journey. And when I look at this father and daughter, it is as if I can see his father's spirit is wrapped around her. For she is his very great treasure. And a profound example of fatherhood was before my eyes. And the people began to straggle into Ebedel, just as it was getting dark. And there were many who met them halfway with food and things of comfort. But many spent the night along the way where they were, being too overwrought to move on in the night. And they posted guards and had no light of fires. And I worried that they would be found, or I worried that they had found everyone. And I saw with Urim that when it was light, a dog from a lot showed up whining. And when they followed it back, it led them to two children hiding in a tree. And they were too afraid to come down. And sounds of life were heard when they came in the midst of the people. They were just little things. And when the people arrived in Ebedel, the whole village was hurrying about tending to the people and getting them settled in, and looking after them. And this event happened some few weeks after the day of the New Year. and people were preparing for each other, and comfort afforded to strangers was as sweet and profound as one would find expressed in close families. And I saw a little dwelling made of limbs between two trees, where a young maiden lived named Netzah, Strong's 53:42. And she was descended of Shamar, and her dwelling was closed in with woven willows and wet earth spread on top. And she had a Habah, and Shum stayed with her. And in the days that followed, there were much activity and many plans were made, and people were getting acquainted. And it was said by Myra that the invitation for them to visit probably saved their lives, because their family may have been who the brigands of Tawa were looking for. For there were reports that the raiders inquired concerning Rabab and Myra, and the wicked love revenge and sought it. And the wicked love revenge and sought it. Even in this case, after 20 years had gone by. And it came to pass that the question began to be asked, what will these people do? And some said they may just stay in Ebedel. But others said Ebedel is too close to tower for them, and the elders of Malat were unwilling to bring danger upon the people of Ebedel. And in the midst of these discussions, the two mothers met in formal talks, as it had been written. And it came to pass that the company from Malat departed from Ebedel just after the time that we know as the trumps of Shabbat. And they numbered around 100 people or more. And they went walking in line for a long way on narrow trails towards the eastern shoulders of Mount Quetar. And then they turned west and south. And they were laden with provisions of dried fish and berries and nuts and preserved meats. And I saw heavy baskets of thick dough wrapped in leaves. And tears of departing flowed between them all. And Myra and Rabab found it hard to say goodbye to Shum. And the parents of Rabab did not want to leave her, but they loved their daughter more than their own desires, knowing they may never see her again. But her happiness was all that mattered to them. And the will of Anoki said had for her. And I was interested to see how things would progress with Shem and Shum. But it was too busy for them to speak much longer or speak much together. And it is as if they were not really looking for their rightful purpose. And they were not desperate with any thought for not being married. And then suddenly one day, there they were together. But after the meeting, the mothers decided the two girls would stay. Shem and Shum were often seen walking alone rather than together. And their response to meeting each other was very interesting to me, as they were both intent upon seeking the law, not asking whether they should get married. But they were made urgent from their meeting to find out more about their visions. Thank you, Heavenly Father. And I could feel the question was not, what is my vision at this person's spouse? But simply it was to ask the Lord, what do I need to know from you so I can live my life and not fail to do my part in your desire for me? And they did not want to let the law down, nor each other. And what they felt when looking into each other's eyes was so certain that they were immediately beyond the question of, is this the rightful companion for me to marry? And I could see that there was a hunger in their settlement, in the brigands of Tawa, would also run low of food in the springtime. And it was this time of the year that they went raiding to steal provisions. And every year in the spring, the people waited for the spring migration of water birds, and parrots. And this year, the need was greater because they had given so many provisions away to the travelers. All right. And because of this, their labors in the hunt and in the gathering kept all the people busy. And those with young backs were engaged in abundant planting. And all this made it difficult for Shem and Shum to spend time together. Let me just share this thought with you that came to my mind from reading yesterday. If you call, consider this, if you're called to do the will of the Most High, or if you're called to teach or preach or to share, whatever your calling may be, I would just say consider doing what comes out of your heart to do as led by the Spirit. Because remember, we're not led to be in competition with anyone. We're not here to allow others to put us in a position that you got to be better than this brother, or you got to perform like that video, or this. That's not what we're here for. See, that's still the system of the enemy. Don't let that come into the church of the Most High. I don't care if not one person watched this video. One man or woman. I'm doing it out of the love for the Most High and the love for doing this out of my heart. Maybe that's why you do it too. But don't let this system of Facebook's ratings, because I don't get paid to do this. I'm not asking for quote unquote money to do this. Most High said, freely you've received, so freely give. So I'm giving out of my heart. I'm not trying to compete with anyone. So I'm not going to let the system of, and maybe you shouldn't either, of the way things are done on the internet for ratings, for likes, like this. Give me a like. As long as the Most High likes it, I love it. All praises to our King. Melchizedek 9, 1-43. And it came to pass that with the planting finished and the arrival of the migrating birds, their labors were eased. And one evening in the midst of this, Imzara came to the dwelling of Netzar, and one had to bend low to enter. And the girls invited her in and called her grandmother. And after a while, she said, I've come to give a gift to Shum. Come outside with me. And the girls were surprised to see that many of the people that gathered around to see what Imzara would do. And it was a very serious occasion. And Imzara was standing beside Noah. And all the people were waiting for her to speak. And after she had welcomed everyone, she gave Shum a crown of woven grass. And was a braided crown of 4 strands of mother's grass, woven with flowers in it to make a complete circle. And she placed it upon Shum's head, with the flowers hanging down around and before her eyes. And Imzara was filled with the Spirit. And she prophesied and said, I am bestowing upon you the song of the dance that came down to us from our first mother when she came out of Eden. And with you, this song and dance is for the Erkadasha. And many holy women have danced it and sung the holy song. But for you, you will become the mother of the dance. in a time yet to come, and you will dance not only with your body, but with your soul. And I say this because during your time, the Ekadasha will be summoned and assembled in a way that they never have been before. And you, as a holy woman, will teach them things that they have not known. And from your day going forward, the song of the dance will have a new meaning, and the sound of it will cause the hills to awaken, and the Erkadashai to assemble themselves before the face of Anoki said. And upon the people hearing all these things, those who danced gathered together. There were many of them, and they all danced their way around the village. They all danced their way around the village. And Shum being eighth in line, and everyone celebrated this gift. And they all wondered what this young maiden would do that would fulfill this great prophecy. And just what would she teach the Erkadasha that they didn't already know? And it came to pass in those days, Shem and Shum began to prepare to give each other their espousals gifts. And it was great fun for the girls to keep the secret and to just what Shem would give. And Shem took this very seriously, and he consulted often with his mother, and she guided him in the way. But Shem did not have her mother there, so she consulted with grandmother Iona. And the time came to bestow the gifts, and it was considered a private time and was not done in public. But they were never alone in order to abide by the purity of single people, not being alone together in a place of dwelling. Spousal gifts of bread and fish. This is an image. And Shem entered into the dwelling of Netzar together with another young man. And they sat on the ground before the girls. And he had in his possession a little bundle wrapped in leather. And Shem sat on the west side facing him. And she too had a little bundle wrapped in leather. And they looked upon one another with the eyes of love. My. Shem was so radiant and beautiful. And she said, "You go first." And Shem opened his bundle, and it contained a small loaf of bread and a small preserved fish. And Shem looked upon it very surprised, and he said, "I want you to be always like the bread, to join me to the spirit of life of Matzah, who is in all things, so that our righteousness will abound. And with the fish, I want to be your friend on an equal level with the Erkadasha, so that you will be companion of all of us together. And I need someone who is willing to include the Erkadasha that I walk with in their circle of love." And upon hearing this and beholding the bread and the fish, Shum began to cry tears of happiness. And she opened her bundle, and there was a loaf of bread and a fish, and Shum was overcome with joy. See, for you women that's out there, if there's any women listening, this is better than a Harlequin novel, ain't it? But this is righteous. And they were one in their spirits and in their hopes for holiness in their future together. And Shem said, "It is plain to see that what we desire of others, and we must require of ourselves." And the young man with Shem hastily departed with the news, because he was a listener, so much for it being a private matter. And Shem also departed, because he did not want to be alone with the maidens in their house. 55. And the word spread that their espousal gifts were the same. And it was a continuing marvel to everyone. And they all wondered what it could mean for their gifts to be exactly alike. And some did not know what to think of their request of each other to include their Kadasha in their personal friendship. And it came to pass that in the fall, they were spending time alone with the law every day to learn more about their visions. And one day during this time, the girls were laughing and cooking in their dwelling. And it was after dark because the fall harvest was so demanding that they had to work until it was dark before they could cook and eat, and it was cool outside. And into this scene of happiness came a very old woman, wrapped up from the cold. And it was great grandmother Iona. And she had stooped down very low to come in, and the girl said, "Grandmother, you shouldn't be out at night walking alone." And they embraced her and cleared a place for her to sit comfortably. And they scolded her for not having someone to come along with her to help her. And Iona smiled and said, but dear ones, I am on a mission for matzah. How could I stay home?" And I was so excited that I didn't want to take the time to bring a companion. And they all became very reverent and sat down in the middle of the room before her. And Iona had a little bundle, and in it was a well-made wooden box. And she said, "Matzah has instructed me to bring you the guidance tablet." And Shem also, okay, let me go back. He continues to the next page. This is Melchizedek 9 and 59, continue 159, page 334. I received it from my grandfather, Reshuya, who was the principal person to establish this tablet in Qatar. And Reshuya taught me how to read it, starting at an early age. And when his eyes grew dim, he passed it on to me. And my eyes are now beginning to grow dim, and I am here before you. Now understand that Matzah has asked me to teach you how to read this tablet. It is how to live a guided life. And I am now old, and I have asked Matzah to prolong my life so that you will live long enough to accomplish his request and see the fruits of this tablet in the lives of the people. And Iona was very thin, and the light of the fire shone upon her, and her face and smile radiated like a little innocent child, and her hair was snow white, and she was beautiful to look upon. And I wondered at the very unfortunate loss Methuselah would confront one day when he stood before Nokise, to have not lived his whole life with her to arrive at this place, with her with a similar innocence of heart. And she was only before the law, having suffered the name Alman, or often loneliness, in all her service to a Nokise. And her vision had always been to be the wife of a man of Abara. And when he chose not to be his calling, she continued to remain faithful to the law as such as a wife. And the law became her holy man of Abara for her. And it came to pass that Iona began to prophesy. And she said, your husband will summon and call forth all the hosts of heaven, and the Arkadasha will enter in and make a great covenant before the face of Anokise. And it will be a sure covenant to stand. all throughout the course of the earth. And you will dance to assemble the Erekadashai, and you also will call them to covenant, that they, every one of them, will always abide to live by and act to keep the guidance of this tablet. And they will mark every detail of the 10 guidances to keep them in all their ways. And the two of you together will stand before Anokise for a jubilee of days, so that this covenant will become sevenfold and complete in its expression and power. And they will look upon you as one who is like their mother. And the spirit of our first mother, Kava, will be with you as your abiding angel. And she has been all your days. And it was she who petitioned Matzah to summon the forces that brought Ahaba back to her gift of life. And the Erekadashai will look upon your husband to be one who will guide their service. And if he was assigned to be their overseer, the seal. Okay, this is prophecies about Shem and Chum, Melchizedek, chapter 9, page 165, 9 and 165, verse 165. And after this, all remained quiet for some time because of the enormity of the prophecy. And the girls had Iona stay with them through the night. And they stayed for days out of respect for the prophecy. And Iona was rejuvenated by the outpouring of the love of the girls and from the presence of the Spirit. And it came to pass that Shem heard of these two great prophecies. And he knew that only a few people knew that Iona had tablets. And he thought no one knew about Shem raising Ahaba from the dead. And he came all the more urgent to discover all he could about his vision. And he lived alone in a small little round thatched dwelling. And one night in the early hours, he lay awake pleading with the law to bless him and to know what to do to be able to provide the circumstances for Shem to be able to fulfill her vision. And it was hard for him to understand what was said about him in the prophecies. And he felt comforted by the law spirit when the Spirit told him that his vision would come before his face after he had completed assisting his father in his task in calling forth the flood. And as he pondered all this in his heart, the room began to get light. And off to the north side of the room, there sat a pot of water on the ground. And Shem sat up and looked over, and he saw the law sitting by the water pot. And Shem sat up and recovered himself, being fully alert. And the law offered Shem a drink in his hands. And then the law drank from the pitcher. And Shem sat down beside the law. And I was amazed that he could be so calm. And then I remembered how calming the presence of the law was for me when he came and stood before me in the days of my youth. And Shem's eyes were wide with wonder and anticipation, because his questions about his vision were still fresh in his mind. And the law poured water on the sandy floor, and he smoothed it out with his hand. And he took a stick and began to carefully draw the covenant tablet. And the law explained it all as he drew it. And Shem not only heard the words, but his heart was so penetrated to the center with what he felt by the Holy Spirit concerning what was written upon the tablet. And even though he had heard some of it from his grandfather, the instructions of the law far exceeded the wisdom and knowledge of man. And in his heart, Shem was still searching to know about his vision. And the law discerned the thoughts of Shem's heart. And he said, little son, it is your vision to call forth the spirit of life in the Erkadasha. This is what invited the law to enter into them. Noted at the bottom. And define and protect them. And give meaning to their task. And set the boundaries around them. And the fourth spirit of life in all creation, and especially the Erkadasha, noted their definition. Have a need for you to intervene with your agency to do so. And I will come with instructions for you from time to time according to your need. And the vision of your wife will come to be fulfilled in the midst of these things. Now, you must preserve this drawing until you can make a tablet, and I will guide you in the way as you learn to be a scribe of righteousness. And the day will come when you will summon the Erkadasha for a multitude of days, and you will set in place a covenant between mankind and the Erkadasha that defines the task and fulfillment of the spirit of life in the Erkadasha that they have been given since the days of our first parents in Eden. And your task is this, in this, will have an eternal effect. And Shem was overcome, and he lay down like he was asleep. And the law put his hand upon him and anointed him as he slept. And the law prayed for him, and then he said, sleep on, little son. For this day I have named you Michael. You are my prince. And the law departed. And I saw that the drawing was covered up with a basket to protect it. And the sand hardened as it dried. And it came to pass that after these things I saw that in the village of Ebedel, there is often distress for the want of food early in the springtime. But this year it was more severe than usual because they had provided for the travelers. And the migrating birds seemed to have delayed their coming. And all there was left for a little share of wheat. And the children are hungry. And I see that the people are gathered together to offer prayers, that the law will provide for the children. And this is the first time I've seen a censer being used in worship. And I see that the people are not downcast, but are confident in their faith in the law to provide. And many adults are going without so the children can eat. And it is this setting in which Shem entered into his dwelling when the law came to draw the tablet and anoint Shem to name him Michael. And where he lay on the floor near the tablet drawing, he dreamed a dream coming from the power of the tablet written by the hand of the law. And in his dream, he dreamed that the earth was new and there was no sorrow for lack of provisions and no fear of being raided by the brigades of Tawa. And now all the earth was happy and there is peace. Sounds like in Revelations, he took away all tears from their eye. With the sounds of life all throughout the land, and Shem was rested in his soul by the dream. And I knew what he dreamt was a foreshadow of the effects of the tablet of fulfillment of time. that there would be a new heaven and a new earth. And it came to pass that Shem awoke to the sounds of the children of crying outside because they were hungry. And he called out to the Lord, when will my dream come true? And as he was lamenting, and wondering how to comfort the children, knowing he had no food to share, and he had heard a shout, and then lots of shouts. And he went outside and saw that everyone was going about collecting baskets. And he asked, what is the law doing as he passes by? And they said, there are fish swarming the river near the altar of Noah. There are so many. They can be pitched out into the bank by the basketful. And I saw all the people hastening towards the river, and they filled their baskets and had to go back for more. And when the last of them returned, all the men and women were busy preparing food. And I heard them sing a song of the third heaven in their joy, and they sang, and they prayed prayers of thanksgiving, again with a prayer censer. And when the meal was served to the adults, and Shem and Shum looked into each other's eyes and quietly said, bread and fish, and faith abounded. And many learned a valuable lesson in their repentance. And in the days that followed, migrating birds returned and were caught in abundance in nets. And the herbs of the field were green, and the winter was over. And after those days, Shem told his mother that he must go to find stone so he can make a tablet. And she instructed him how he must listen to hear the language of Ebedel. We talked about Ebedel in the first video. And she asked the rocks of her childhood to guide him in the way. And they said they would gladly do it. And Shem set off on his journey to the northwest. And he went past the village of Malat. And it was still in ruins a year later. They brought back bitter memories. And the spirit of Exalt was there to oppose him in his mission, because Exalt teaches violence and war. And it was he who had guided the brigades of Tawa there. And this Exalt took delight in the destruction of the people there. And Exalt was angry because Ahaba had raised from the dead. He was angry at Shem because he loved her. And Exalt did not know the hidden name of Shem, nor the one of Shem. And it was good. It was a good thing, because he would have been instructed by it for evil. And Exalt followed Shem as he journeyed northward, troubling him in his heart. And some brigades of Tawa were nearby, and they were allied with Exalt in their hearts. And one of them thought he was a man traveling wearing a garment of couture. And Exalt put it in their minds to pursue him. And they made their plans and tried to anticipate where he would go so they could entrap him. And as they were preparing their weapons, a great giant, Ayala, came out and stood before them. And they chased it in hot pursuit. In this way, they were distracted in their evil plans against Shem. And the Ayala gave its life to protect Shem. And thus the Erkadasha protected Shem. And the anger of Aziel dissipated away, because thus swallowed up by the Erkadasha. And I saw in this a very interesting thing. Shem was actually doing a worship for 40 days. to set in place his order of service as a man of Abara, even though he did not know it. And Enoch had done 40 days when he divided the waters in the sons of heaven at the eastern water place of Mahua. And it too was to set his order of service in place, even though he had also did not know of it. And it is interesting to note that with Enoch, the Kadarche were somewhat respectful in asking him to present their petitions to Anokise for them to find forgiveness in order to avoid their day of recompense. And they did not know how to oppose him. But with Shem, the only thing the Darker Watchai could think to do was to kill him. And by the time Matzah was in the flesh and did his 40 days, they had learned they could mock him and say, if you are the Son of God, do this. Or offer him a way to glorify himself with the powers of the world. Melchizedek chapter 9, verse 190. And by this time, Shem had been gone 30 days. And in the evening, he was camped below a large, steep bluff. And I can see him grinding some seeds between two stones. And he made a thick paste that he cooked on a hot rock. And he looked up and he saw a cavity in the base of the cliff. And he was finishing his meal. The rocks he had cooked with, spoke to him. And they said, go and see. And it was plain for him to hear. And in the night, he wondered what it could mean. And it came that in the morning, when the light first began to dawn, he heard singing. And it was the song of the dance. And he said, how can this be? Who can be here who knows the song? And I am come to a place where I've never been before. And then he remembered the rock saying, go and see. So he followed the sounds of singing. And he went to see. And he went to the cave. But the sound were coming from above. And it was too steep to climb. So he went around about and came up on top from the side. And now the sounds were coming from below him. And he espies to a ledge part way down. He decided to go down to a ledge to see. And there on the ledge were the stones that were singing. And upon his arrival, they became quiet, and they were thin and flat. And they were hard, but could be scratched with a tool. And Shem said, what a marvelous thing. And the rocks of the tablet sought me out. And I thought that I was seeking them. And Shem lit a fire, and he worshiped there on the ledge. And he dug some stone out and took up to the top. And it was enough for several tablets. And he thanked the spirit of Ebedel and gave her an element of righteousness. And he spoke to the tablet rocks and asked them if they wanted to go on a journey because they had never traveled before. And down below where he camped, there was a stream. And it was there that he broke them to be nearly the right size. And he rubbed them on rocks in the water to shape them to be tablet size and to lessen his load to carry home. And I do not know what kind of stone it was, but it was thin layer and light in color. And he wondered if the water in the rock spoke to the tablet stones, because he knew it was the rocks and the water that had taught his grandfather that which would be written upon them. And having been gone for 40 days, he arrived home rejoicing. And he reported to his mother how the rocks had called to him to seek him out. And he never did know about the Ayala. But he knew that the Ekadashah had swallowed up the anger of the Decadarchai against him. And he would later learn it was in fact Aziel who had accosted him. And Shem and his mother tried to be discreet about the tablet stones, but the word got out. And it was said that Shem was going to be a scribe of righteousness like unto Enoch. And even unto the righteous there can be found penalties. And even among the righteous there can be found pettiness. And some said, what need have we for another scribe of righteousness when our religion is well established? And is it well known that Noah will do his task? And some said, why does this come from a woman who is called Almam? And none of them could anticipate what it would be like after the flood. And it came to pass that Shem knew how holy his task was. And he carved the tablets alone inside his dwelling or out in a lonely place. And all he did was viewed as a great curiosity and a wonder that anything could be written upon a stone save the guidance. And the time came when he was done, and everyone knew he was finished with it, but he would only show it to his great-grandmother Iona. And upon seeing it, knowing somehow how to read it, she exclaimed, never was there written upon a stone so great a thing. And now, having seen it, my eyes have only one desire yet remaining, and that is to once again see my mother. And in the face of jealousy, Shem withheld showing the tablet because it was holy. And I have seen the day that Iona beheld her mother, Aku, at the oaks of Patah. And she is one of the most humble women that ever live upon the earth. And she served the Savior Matzah the Lamb with her whole soul, doing a long, hard life, which life is yet to this day bearing fruit and is not done yet. And it came to pass that it came time for the wedding of Shem and Shum. And word was sent to Rabab and Mara that in the spring Shum was to be married. And during the days preceding the wedding, all was in commotion as the girls were making dress. And the men were seeking special provisions for the meal. And the people were busy in their labors getting ready. And everybody was saying their guesses about how the lives of Shem and Shum would go. And they did not forget that their espousal gifts were one and the same. In the evening, 2 days before the wedding, while people were mingling around the light of fire, a strange lad appeared at the edge of the light. And he was just standing there. And he was dressed as a slave of Tawa. And he was husky and young and unafraid. And all talking became quiet. And he just stood there because he did not know their custom of an approaching stranger sitting down to show his peaceful intentions and then waiting patiently to be approached. And Lamech stood to go over to him, but some would have forbid him. And before they knew it, he went to the lad and asked, "What is it that you seek? How may we come to your aid?" And the lad said, "I'm looking for the one named Myra. Do you know if there's a Myra here?" And Lamech said, "Yes, we do. What is it that is required for her?" And the lad replied, "Matzah." And Myra was there, but she was in a dwelling visiting. And a word was sent to her saying, "A certain person named Matzah is inquired about you." And Myra screamed and rushed forth out of the place and cried out, "Where is she?" And the young lad went back a ways into the darkness. And he brought two women into the circle of the light, and they were dressed like the slaves of Tawa. And Myra cried, "Maddie," and rushed forward to embrace her. And these two were the sisters of Myra. And all three of them had been taken captive from a place north of Arel Sea, and had become separated in their servitude. And one was named Matzah, Strong's 4672, and the other one was Mosiah. And they told a tale of high danger, for during their servitude, they heard tales from raiders that they had found and pillaged a village where Rabab and Myra had lived, but they had escaped. And that was the first they had known that Myra was still alive since the time of their separation. And upon hearing this tale, they departed. They determined they would escape and go to seek Myra at their first opportunity. And this lad was the son of one of the raiders, and the woman had paid him and to lead them to where the village was found. And he had led them to Ebedel after finding the ruins of Malat. And Myra and her sisters wept upon each other's shoulders. And they said, "We are faint for the want of food." And they fed them. And in the morning, clothed them with new and righteous clothes. And great tender care was shown for these lovely ones. And when they arose, were ready, they came out into the light of day. And they were told that on the morrow, their niece Shum was to be married. And there would be a wedding. And they had never heard of a wedding before. And they began to look about with wonder, because they had never seen happy people before, and never had heard of the sounds of life with children. And there were no weapons and no fears, no groanings. And Maddie said, "I have emerged into heaven, out of darkness into the light." And those standing by who heard her words burst out in song. And it was the song of the third heaven. And they explained the sanctity of marriage to these two women. And these two had not known that any respect for women existed upon the earth. And Matzah and Mosiah were the younger sisters of Myra. And when they were young, Myra, see Strong's 4829, was their protector before they became slaves. And when Myra departed from her home after the wedding, they went with her. And the lad who guided them approached Lamech, and he said, "I have received my wages for bringing the two women here. And I had intended to go back, but my desire now is to stay." And he held out what looks like a large stone knife. And he said, "This is my wages, but I will give it to you if I can stay." And Lamech replied, "Little son, heaven is free." And they gave him new clothes also. And they said they would name him a new name and view him as one of them. And it came to pass that with the drawing of a new day, all was astir in settlement. See, this is an example of the Gentiles coming in. with a pure heart, designed to really be there. And he was accepted into, as he say, heaven gladly. And it came to pass that with the dawning of a new day, all was astir in the settlement. For it is a huge celebration, and a group of girls are clustered talking together. And it appears that there are many visitors, and I see tents of people of Aved, and some of the people of Aha are here. So perhaps they brought Myra and her family with them. And I hear them calling the lad from Tawa Kafusa, Strong's 2668, which is his new name. And it means one who is freed from slavery. And I see that Matzah and Mosiah, along with Kafusa, are wide-eyed with wonder to behold a free and happy people, all acting together with no master. And for the first time, with this vision, I get a sense of a long and well-established culture with a very diverse group of people, all knowing exactly what will happen. And it seems that I am the only one who does not know what will happen. And I see that there are many people, and they are forming a line with much discussion as to who stands where, and all their places are chosen, and Rock is at the first in the front. And he is wearing a leather girdle as a worship garment, and he must be the one performing the ceremony. Behind him is Baith, his wife, followed by all the followed by all the elderly children are killed. Get it right. Followed by all the elderly kindred of Shem and Shum, and behind them their parents with uncles and aunts, and then the wedding couple and their close friends behind, and lastly everybody else. And they're explaining to Matzah and Mosiah that with the procession of this formed, with the older people in front followed by the parents, it means that the whole family supports the wedding. And if the old people were last, then they would probably call off the wedding. So everyone is very serious about their place in the line. And everyone is walking with interest, with interest to see how the line would form, or the line is formed. And I can see them now start out. And it looks like they're going to a place further away than I would have expected. And a storm is coming up. And I see dark and rolling clouds. And there's a very loud peal of thunder. And the people seem underrated or undertiered. And they start to move in a long single file. And another clap of thunder crashes close by. I'm just trying to see how much is left. We're almost there. And yet another one sounds immediately behind them, as though it is hurting them alone. And in the distance, I see a stream where Rak taught Melchizedek. And before my eyes was one of the most sacred places on earth, because Rak was able to hear. The rocks in the water were there speak the truth that the messenger of the truth had placed in their souls on the day that he created them for his Father. And as if in direct answer to my thoughts, lightning struck a pine tree on the north side, a little way beyond the rock that divided the water. And it was plain to see that Rak had discerned the meaning of it, for he had halted the procession, and they all waited. And they were murmuring in the procession, saying it was the place of the daily worship of both Rak and Shem. And there was a collective gasp when lightning struck again, a bit farther away on the south side. And again, it was a pine tree. And so with this Rak called the wedding couple to come up front. And he inquired of them what they had intended, and giving their spousal gifts back to the earth as an eternal witness to the foundation of their marriage before the law and with the Ekadashah. And they pointed to a rock upon the hillside where they had planned to bury the gifts under the south side of it. And Rak said, the thunder has made a proclamation that it desires to be the one among the Ekadashah who is charged with the safekeeping of the foundation of your marriage. And it spoke in the fifth thunder, indicating your marriage will be bound up in the right hand of the great Anoki said, the great Holy One Anoki said. And both your walks in holiness, as claimed by the pine trees, now belong wholly to him. Therefore, you both must offer your gifts to the thunder at the pine trees. Wedding procession, Shem and Sham. Melchizedek 9, Yatzel brings the fire. And I see them going out to do his bidding. And Shem approached the pine tree on the north, and kneeling down, he deposited the bread and the fish in the pine needles and covered them up with forest duff. And Shem went out to the tree on the south side and did the same. And listeners spread the word to all who were in the procession. And it came to pass that when the procession started up again, a long rolling rumble of thunder could be heard in the far distance, and it was felt to be plainly rejoicing. For the comfort of Anoki said is these things in tears of joy began to lightly fall as the processions continued on its way. And I can now see a cliff in the distance. And it looks like they are headed for having the wedding under a overhang at the base of the cliff. And as they approach the site, they begin to find their places. Lightning strikes a tree just on the other side of the stream nearby, and ground is smoking. And a man they call Biara, Strong's 1200, pronounced Biara, who is thus called because he is a fire keeper, goes over to get the fire for the wedding. And Rak said that Anoki said brought the fire himself with the seven thunder to indicate that the lifelong repentance and behavior of this couple must be firmly rooted in their daily walk with Matzah the Lamb, and that repentance alone will enable them to succeed. And in all they are called upon to do. And I see that the firewood had been gathered and prepared beforehand. And I noticed the seven thunders had struck a grand old oak tree, and it continued to gently smoke on the ground and during the ceremony. And to me, it felt like the smoke of the presence of Elder. And in the midst of all this, I could discern that the firekeeper and the brother of Netzar, and the firekeeper is the brother of Netzar, who had taken Shem in to live with her. And they are descendants of Shamar. And I see that as soon as the procession has arrived and found their places, they all stand and sing the wedding song, which was sung in Elder and brought back by Enoch. And they do this before they do anything else. And it is raining harder now. And the couple is seated out of the middle of a half circle formed against the cliff overhang. And their hair is being prepared as in the usual way for weddings. And Rack had a pot of water brought for them to wash with and to drink. But it was now raining more, and a small rivulet of water was cascading down from above and forming a little stream of water that fragmented into droplets near the ground. And it was falling right between Shem and Shum. And the wind would blow it a little from one side to the other, getting them both wet. And I can hear the quiet laughter of the people. And Rack said, the Erekadashah are conducting this wedding, and I am only here to be their witness. And they used the rainwater to wash with and to give each other their marriage drink. And all the people understood now what it meant for them to share their relationship with one another, with the Erekadashah, one another together with the Erekadashah. And in those moments, the Erekadashah felt like they too were getting married. And it would turn out in Shabbat they were. My. What a first time wedding at Maddie and Marcia to witness. And Maddie said, their God is in heaven, and he alone is their master. And they are indeed free. And both Maddie and Marcia were born again as to what God meant to them. Oh, praise. And Mosiah said, from this day on, no man will be my master, save Anoki said alone. So there we have it. All praises to our King, the Most High. Anoki said, for he is loving kindness. Find out and see for yourself. All praise.